We kind of committed ourselves, and then that's when I started to meet the kids and start building our relationship. And they were 1-year-olds and 3 at the time, so they were babies, they were in nappies.
It can be quite daunting, can't it, if you've got no experience with children and then you come into that environment, because you want to do your best, you want it to work, and there's probably quite a lot of pressure on you to...
They just grew up calling me mummy, just as they have their other 2 mummies. So I've always been a fixture in their lives. And maybe this is me with my rose-tinted glasses, but I've never really approached our family as necessarily an LGBTQ plus family. We are just a family.
Welcome to the Heartbreak to Happiness Show with Sara Davison. If you're struggling with a breakup and you feel shocked, angry, betrayed, devastated, or sad and alone, then this podcast is for you. Best-selling author and award-winning host Sara Davison shares how you too can get on with your life to heal, grow, and move from heartbreak to happiness. Here's your host, Sara Davison.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Super excited today to have Jennie Guay as my guest. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jennie before we get started. She's a former financial services professional working in Toronto, Canada, and in the City of London. And after meeting her partner, Sam, in London in 2016, Jennie moved her life to the northwest of England to support raising her 2 stepchildren, Frankie and Harry. Now, Jennie has also written and published a children's book called How We Blend Playdate Adventures with Family and Friends, which provides kids with a real-life depiction of blended and diverse families. And Jennie is a regular contributor to parenting publications, podcasts, and radio segments across the UK, US, and Australia, in addition to guest lecturing at schools in the Northwest on difference and diversity, which we will definitely dive into today. Now, in 2022, Jennie also launched her own podcast called Why Are We Whispering, which tackles human traumas, embarrassments, and shame that most of us have or will experience in our life, but are too afraid to say out loud. So we'll definitely get talking about that too. So welcome, Jennie, to the show.
Thank you so much, Sara, for having me on.
Well, I'm really excited because you talk about a lot of topics I don't think we've really covered so much in depth on my podcast. So thank you so much for coming on. So let's talk a little bit about becoming a step parent, because I know a lot of people listening will have been thrown in the deep end, maybe didn't have their kids of their own, and then thrown into being a step parent. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, so I don't think anyone really grows up thinking, oh, when I become a step parent. Right? Like, that's not really on the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about what your future is going to be when you're grown up, and, you know, should you have children of your own. You never really consider that you might end up raising children that somebody else birthed. And so my journey was probably not so much different to most. Maybe with a few extra elements in there, just being that we are a same-sex couple, which kind of changes things slightly, but not really. And yeah, so my journey was, I met Sam, my wife, as you mentioned, in 2016. And when on our very first date, she actually mentioned that she had children, which I wasn't expecting at all, for those words to come out of her mouth. And yeah, I just kind of took a moment. I was like, okay, I'm not going to panic just yet. We're going to see how things go. So, you know, as the relationship started to progress and we were getting more and more serious, obviously the topic then of conversation moves towards, you know, well, we wanted to have a date, let's say, when she had her children. And I was like, ooh, I'm not so sure about that. And for me, growing up, I come from a very heteronormative family dynamic. My parents have been together for like 45 years. They're still happily married. I had a wonderful childhood. And so I take parenting very seriously. And it wasn't something that I had ever really considered or saw myself doing anyways, even as a biological mother. It was very career focused. So when she kind of suggested us having a date during the time that she had the kids, I took a step back and I said, I think that you and I need to just maybe just reevaluate where we're at in our relationship, because I don't want to build a relationship with your children if I'm not going to be there in 6 months' time. I think that that can be quite traumatic for kids.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice for anyone really, whether it's same-sex relationship or not. So getting involved in children's lives is a big deal, right? And I
It's a
think you've got
huge
to be
deal.
careful.
Absolutely, because children they build bonds so quickly, especially if you're a trusted somebody that they feel drawn to, they build a trust with, and to then rip that away from them in a way that they wouldn't understand is not something that I wanted to be involved in. So we very much had a real conversation. We kind of committed ourselves, and then that's when I started to meet the kids and start building our relationship. And they were 1 year old and 3 at the time, so they were babies, they were in nappies. So that was a huge benefit for me. My hat goes off to men and women who come into children's lives when they are, 10 plus, because it's much harder to establish that relationship and that trust. And they're coming into their big personalities at those ages. So the pushback is much greater, especially if on the other side in the other household, you might have somebody who's practicing parental alienation tactics or, high conflict that can get in that child's ear. It's much harder when the kids are older. So I very much, count my lucky stars that they were babies when I met them, because they just grew up calling me mummy, just as they have their other two mummies. So I've always been a fixture in their lives.
Okay, I mean that's great, and I agree. If you come in early, like my son, we were separated. I was separated from my husband when my son was 1. So growing up, he actually didn't know any different to just mummy living in this house and daddy living in another house. And I think that makes it a lot easier because there's not a huge change that they're consciously aware of that they're being sort of dragged through in some cases. So I think that does make a difference. But it obviously is possible as children get older, and there are things that you can do. What tips would you have for people who are coming into being a step parent, especially because you didn't have children of your own? So that can be quite daunting, can't it? If you've got no experience with children and then you come into that environment because you want to do your best, you want it to work, and there's probably quite a lot of pressure on you to make it work.
Absolutely. For me, I very much took my cues from the children. So for me, they were leading the charge. They were the ones who I wanted it to be a completely organic experience and a natural experience for them. I didn't want to force my preconceptions of what I wanted onto them, because I knew that the outcome of that would not be in my favor. So we just normalized everything. I did everything with Sam and the kids, and so when they were with Sam, I just was a part of that natural fixture. I got involved in their schools quite early on as well. Also because it just worked with our schedules, from like a work perspective, etc. It made more sense for me to be one of the kind of primary contacts for the kids with the schools. So the schools, when they started talking to the kids about home life, they would include me in that naturally because I was a point of contact for them. So that also helped establish the normalcy and the consistency of my relationship and my presence in their lives, because they had other authoritative figures.
I know that there are people listening to this who are going to say that that might be their biggest, worst nightmare, that their ex-partner moves on, has another partner who then is very involved in the school life, very involved in day-to-day activities, because, as a parent, whether male or female, we don't sort of have children expecting we're not going to be there every day for them. We're not going to, be picking them up from school or waking them up in the morning, putting them to bed, so having somebody else in there can be a difficult dynamic to navigate. How do you
Absolutely.
find that?
I 100% empathize with birth parents in that regard, but on the same token, um, you want your children to be surrounded by other adults who do take an interest in their life and who do have a vested interest in their well-being and in their healthy development. So whilst, yes, of course, that might be a stab to the heart, there's also the peace of mind on the flip coin of that, that your child is being well taken care of when they're not with you. And what I would encourage parents to do, whether you're step parents, birth parents, however your family dynamic is set up, is if you can and you can get out of your own way to establish a friendship or even just a cordial relationship with the other parents. So you have that open communication, and that can also alleviate some of the stress that you might feel when your children aren't with you, because you would feel comfortable to message that other parent, be like, hey, how's it going? You know, I was just worried that, so and so, maybe she wouldn't do well at her gymnastics tournament. How's she doing? And you can have that kind of dialogue, but, you have to be a grown up about it and get out of your own way in order to have that.
Yeah, and it's really hard sometimes, but I do agree that I mean my advice to people in that situation is always you've got to put your kids first.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it probably will be quite painful having somebody else going to say the gymnastics tournament instead of you, but maybe you can go too if you've got a good relationship there, or maybe that other person wouldn't go if they knew that would upset you. But ultimately, it's about working together, because if the kids are happy and that person is kind and caring, then
Yeah.
that's an amazing thing. Because all too often, sometimes, I've just been listening to a couple of podcasts actually about it, where there's statistically some, step parents coming in can be, actually quite a risk to children. And we talk a lot about domestic abuse.
Yes.
We talk a lot about people coming in who don't care about the kids because they're not their kids. Obviously, with you, it's a very different situation. But if you've got somebody like you, Jenny, it's an absolute blessing. Even if maybe you don't get on with a person, or you see the world differently, or they did something that was pretty upsetting. Maybe they were involved in the breakdown of your relationship, which I know wasn't the case with you at all. But in a lot of cases with my clients, it is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a difficult pill to swallow. But
Yeah.
again, it's about putting your kids first and saying, look, as long as this person is kind, they're baking cookies with my child, they're taking them out on a bike ride, they're doing the things, so when my child is there, they're okay, they're happy, and they're safe. That is a real blessing compared to what the other option or possibility could be, right?
Absolutely. And I think maybe something that often gets missed is, or, we fail to acknowledge that our children will also have a relationship and a love for that step parent. So for them to not be included in going to the gymnastics or going to the football game or whatever, because your feelings are hurt by their presence, you're really neglecting your child's emotional needs in that regard as well. So it's really important to respect that your child views that step parent with love and as a parent in their life, and also wants them to be there
Yeah,
too.
yeah. And I guess again, there's a difference, because I know people, I could just hear them, because obviously I work in this. But if someone's like with you, you were there from a very young age and are very
Yeah.
well established in those children's lives. A lot of my clients, their other halves will have partners that are in and out. So it'll be somebody that's in for a few weeks, a few months, maybe a year, and then the next one, and then the next one. And that can be difficult because
Yeah.
it's a constant sort of moving conveyor belt of different people. And again, ultimately we have to take the same approach. If they are good and they're good to our kids, then that's all good. If they're not, then that can be where obviously the issues will obviously take place. But I mean, I love the fact that there are, you're shining a light on the fact that this can be a really positive thing for the children. And actually, as a step parent as well, to give people confidence that it can work really well.
It can. And that kind of age old saying, the more the merrier almost, there's, as my wife always says, there's not enough people that could love my child. Like if it's healthy and it's positive love, then bring it on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So you talk a lot about sort of difference and diversity, Jenny, and I think this is a really important topic, especially at the moment. It's in the media a lot, especially over here in the UK right now. So yeah, how does that impact with children and parenting?
And maybe this is me with my rose tinted glasses, but I've never really approached our family as necessarily an LGBTQ plus family. We are just a family. But having said that, I obviously appreciate that from outsiders looking in, everyone's going to have their own views on what family should look like, and that can have a negative impact on the kids. So what I would say is from our home, our love is the same, our family dynamic is the same as yours, but what we battle against is at times would be the bigotry of others, or just the lack of understanding of what they don't know or what they haven't experienced themselves. So when people are unkind to our kids, or try and make fun of them for having three moms, which by the way is actually quite rare. And I'll get into that in a second. And we just say, those people, their opinions don't matter, and that's unkind, and you would never, and you just kind of work it through with them. But I would say that I think that's probably happened maybe once or twice. Our kids are now 8 and 11, maybe twice. The issues that we face are more with the adults, because kids' hearts are pure. They don't carry, bigotry or ignorance in that regard. It's the parents, or the outside influences. So, we've had to just kind of block off certain people maybe within the school environment that don't mirror our values. And that's fine. That's life. That's life,
Yeah.
right? And so that's also, I think, with adversity for kids is actually can be quite a positive experience. And helps them understand what the world is, not what we like to tell children it is, but what it actually is in reality. And it just probably helps them navigate it more.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I don't see that stigma around like it used to be anymore. And I think with everything, things have changed so much. And I do think you're right. Children are very much more accepting of everything. As long as people are kind and everyone's happy, they'll take their lead from the adults. But obviously, you will get some that have very different views. But I think
Yeah.
that can be across all sorts of things. I mean, I'd love to say that, my son wasn't bullied at school, but he was for just being the child of a divorced family on occasion. People would say, well, your mummy and daddy aren't together, and make comments like that. And that happened more than twice. So,
Yeah.
it really doesn't matter what the scenario is. Kids are going to come across that. And I think the important thing is for us to be aware, as you guys clearly are, and educate your child on how, as you have, like how people's opinions will differ. It doesn't matter if someone doesn't agree, and giving them the coping mechanisms to manage that adversity so it becomes a superpower rather than something that upsets them each time.
And it's really interesting that you said, that kids will pick out, your differences, right? And that's what they do. They're kids. So, oh, you look different to me. I'm going to pick that out, and I'm going to tell you how different you look to me to try and hurt you. Like, that's just a part of growing up. But what we've taught our kids, and what I actually go into schools in the Northwest and teach as well, is that the only thing that makes us the same is the fact that we're all different. So if you're pointing out my difference, you just say, oh, thank you for noticing. And you also have beautifully different skin. And you just flip it right back on its head and you turn it into a positive, because we are all different. None of us are the same. And it's a ridiculous concept that we would be.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very, very true. I do find that fascinating how people will pick on differences, but actually, that's the best thing about other people, is that they're different to us, because that makes them interesting. We can be curious about that. We can ask questions. It's just about understanding, I suppose, and learning to accommodate and accept of, everyone's different, and they each have their strengths and weaknesses like we do.
Absolutely. And it's actually really funny, because what we've actually had the most with just the fact that our children have 3 moms, is a lot of the kids have been like, oh, I wish I had 3 moms. And they've gone home and been like, Mom, can I have another mom? Can we have 2 moms? Yeah.
Funny, because it's so true. My son, I had this funny story, which is different, but again highlights the same point, that when Christmas came around and my son was in nursery, obviously he had Christmas, it were alternate years, one with me and one with his dad.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm always like, that's going to cause me huge pain to not have my son for Christmas every other year. So what can I do to take my power back over this? Well, I can create Christmas on a different day. So actually, my son gets 2 Christmases. So I created the idea for my son that Father Christmas will come twice. If your parents are separated, live in different homes, you just have to let him know about it, and then he'll come. So we always celebrate Christmas every year together with my parents, doing exactly what we would do normally on a traditional 25th of December date. But we might be doing it on the 1st of December if it's the last time I've got my child for that weekend, or maybe in January, but we still celebrate it. So when he was little, he used to be super excited about this. So I've kind of flipped what could be a negative thing into a positive thing, to the point where one of the mums at nursery, and she's lovely, Karen, but you didn't want to be on the wrong side of Karen. She was one of those mums where if it was all going well, you were great, but if you weren't, you'd know about it. And she comes storming across the gravel drive one morning towards me, and I can just hear her feet crunching as she's got her little arms pumping and across. And I'm like, oh no, I'm on the wrong side of Karen today. And she came up, she said, Sarah, can I have a word? And I was like, yes. She said, Santi came, that's my son's name. Santi told James at school that he has 2 Christmases, and James has come home saying, "Can me and my husband separate, please? Because he would like 2 Christmases like Santi." I was like, oh, okay, phew, nothing too serious then. And she was like, yeah, this isn't okay. And I said, well, do you know what? Maybe I may have gone OTT on the whole. This is a great thing, but it works for us.
Yeah.
And it's still happily married. Karen is still happily married. It's the fact that you can create your own reality for your children, right? 3 mums can be the most amazing thing because it is, right? Having 2 Christmases can be the most amazing thing because it is.
Yeah.
So you can flip it, and your kids will, especially at a young age like that, will definitely take their lead from you. So it's powerful stuff. It's powerful, right? So you mentioned earlier a word that actually sends chills down my spine, which was the parental alienation, which is a big, big issue. Explain to people that maybe haven't heard of it before what you mean by that, Jenny. What does that mean, parental alienation?
I think it can mean different things at times for different people, depending on the type of personality that you're dealing with. I think oftentimes it can be associated with a parent who has a diagnosed personality disorder like narcissism or borderline personality disorder, whereby they try and isolate the child or the children and kind of paint the other parent or parents in a negative light, kind of getting in their ear. The way that I would describe it, and unfortunately we've dealt with this ourselves, is it's almost like when the kids come back to you when they were younger, they would just regurgitate a stream of consciousness that came from the other parent. Like, wouldn't stop. It would just be like, this mommy said, and then would just say it. And it's like a knife to the gut because, none of it's true. All of it's toxic. And the child's looking at you saying, is this true? And when you're dealing with, a 6-year-old saying something like that to you, it's heartbreaking. And you don't want to say the wrong thing, because I think where the misstep happens is for the parents that are not practicing parental alienation tactics, is if you then villainize the other parent and say, no, so-and-so is, they're a liar and they're this and they're that. And you're kind of, what you're creating is these two battlegrounds. And the kids are in the middle of that, and they are going to go one way or the other. So it's a really difficult thing to navigate. And I'm not exactly sure, maybe you can give me some advice on what the kind of the correct or the right way to respond in that regard is, but the way that we always responded to it was from a place of kindness. So we would always say, oh, that's unfortunate, or that makes me sad that she would think that. What do you think? And we would flip and get the children to start thinking for themselves, because what I think the misstep that a lot of parents who are high conflict or toxic miss is that children go on the feeling that you give them. So if you are telling a child something that conflicts with how they feel about that person when they're with them, that's not going to bode well for you. So they'll be saying, well, she said that, you're X, Y, and Z, and you've done this to me, but when I'm with you, I feel safe. When I'm with you, I feel calm, I feel happy, I feel cared for. So that I don't think those things about you. And so this is something that we really practiced, was teaching children how to think, not what to think. And that for us has been a savior in terms of trying to battle the tactics from the other side.
I mean, wow, I love that. You guys are spot on with that. I think, not jumping in and giving your side of the story is really important. And obviously this is all age appropriate, with very young kids. They are taking their lead from all the parents, and like you say, they will feel they're much more in touch with their emotions and able to process emotionally what's going on, because they don't have that emotional intelligence to have that experience behind them to say, oh, this is right, this is wrong.
Right.
So they're learning what's right and wrong. They're learning their morals, they're learning their values all the way up to sort of the ages of 8 and 9, when then their beliefs become more set. So they are very able to be influenced, especially up to the sort of age of 7, 8, 9. And then it's quite difficult to change their beliefs back. So I think in those early stages, it really is showing by contrast where in your home, for example, the rules may be no shouting, no lying, no putting other people down, being kind, and rewarding kind behavior is key. Whereas just by contrast, in the other house, there might be more sort of name calling or shouting or lying or confusing behavior. And I think just the contrast for young children, they will feel safer when they're in the healthy dynamic, and they will feel less safe and more uncomfortable, even though they may not understand why, when they're with the other one. So
Yeah.
it's about being available. It's about being able to have that unconditional love, that it's okay to talk about anything. It's okay. And if you do something that maybe we don't 100% agree with, that's okay too. We'll talk it
Yeah.
through, we'll resolve it, and we'll help you move forward. So I think you're spot on. I think it is a form of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way that abusive personality types will use to take their control back. They'll also know this is the biggest pain point for parents. So children and finances are obviously post-separation abuse, probably the only two areas they can control us. Post-separation abuse actually is one of the most misunderstood challenges we have, especially with the family court system.
Yeah.
My lawyer said to me, oh, well, you don't live with them anymore, so it's onwards and upwards from here. And actually following that have been the most horrific abusive years of my life.
I was just going to say your hell was just beginning.
Yeah, which is hard to believe, and you kind of want to believe that would be true, that it would get better. But because they have to funnel it all into this sort of divorce process and the children and the finances, that is extremely, extremely painful when you can see that your children are being put in a situation which is potentially damaging for them. Although I know you and I agree on this, that actually it can be a valuable life lesson if you do have the healthy parents, in your case, sort of giving them that other side, which is actually, this is how it is. And if you can recognize this behavior now or as you grow up, then it's going to prevent you from maybe making some of the mistakes that I know I certainly made when I was older, because I hadn't learned those life lessons. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think just going back to, we touched on it, but consistency for children is so key in that regard, because in the other home, if that parent is practicing parental alienation tactics, there will be a lot more chaos happening in that home environment. Those who haven't experienced a person with those kinds of personality disorders won't appreciate, and they can be subtle to some, but when you are kind of in that hot box, and it does become a hot box, when you come out of it, and this will be the benefit, probably the life-saving thing for a lot of children who have divorced parents, one of which is practicing parental alienation tactics, is the other home won't have that. So they won't have the long-term mental health kind of ramifications of living in that hot box. For us, consistency in our home very much is founded on boundaries, rules, and consequences for bad behavior, and rewards for good behavior. So always follow through on a consequence, and we always reward should the children demonstrate good judgment or kindness, even when they're not even expecting it. We will definitely point out the good things that they're doing and say, that was amazing, that little boy fell down and you ran over and you picked, brought him over to his parent and made sure he was okay. And the other thing that we really practice in our home, which might not be consistent in the other home, is something I call accountability and apology. So when the children, especially at these ages, and I'm sure you can attest to this, my daughter's 11, my son's 8, is they hate owning their mistakes. They fear being wrong. They feel being called out. There's this fear of not being right, and they need to be right all the time, especially my daughter. And so we've started giving her consequences for that. That is not appropriate behavior. What we will, if you do something wrong and you right away take accountability for it and say, I did this and this is why I think I did it, and this is why I won't do it next time, and I'm sorry for it. That's amazing. You will get rewarded for that. Even if the mistake had a negative outcome to it, we will still reward you for acknowledging and taking accountability for your wrongdoing, because that is a life lesson that most adults that I know now can't do. consistency in the home around owning your own behavior and being responsible for your own feelings and your own actions, I think is key to counterbalancing parental alienation tactics.
Yeah, I love that, Jenny. It's really, really good advice. I think you're spot on. It's teaching children empathy and
Mm,
emotional intelligence. And I think that accountability is key to taking ownership because later on in life, I mean, we see this, don't we? The teenage suicide rate is soaring all
yeah.
around the world, not just UK, US, everywhere. And I always look at the coping mechanisms that I see and I hear from my clients, their children are experimenting with, which really didn't exist when I was a child. So, sure it existed, but it just wasn't a mainstream coping mechanism. We used to go for a sneaky cigarette behind the bike shed. Now it's self-harming, it's drugs, it's suicide is soaring for teenagers. And I think not being able to process or take accountability if you're out of control because it's always somebody else's fault and there's
Yeah.
no way you can change how you feel because this is what's happening to you, someone's done that, means you're forever out of control and you
Yeah.
can't get yourself back on that track to feeling good again. Whereas if we could give children techniques and tools that would actually enable them to take their own power back and change how they feel by even 5-star jumps or putting a big smile on their face or putting some happy music on or talking to somebody, which obviously is great that you guys have created that environment where they come to you and can say, look, I made a mistake, hands up. That ability to be able to have that outlet is almost like taking the pressure off them. I think it's really, really clever what you're doing. I think it really will show the kids will reap the rewards moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, and we have to be like, I'm honest with the kids all the time. Everyone makes mistakes. I make mistakes every day, you know? There's nothing wrong with making mistakes if you can own them and make sure that you don't repeat them. And we learn from the mistakes. And I just think that there's so much power, as you mentioned, in instilling that in children to become fully functioning adults.
Yeah. Yeah, valuable life lessons. And this is one of the big
Mm.
things. Like if you are struggling with trauma at a young age, I know as parents we want to wrap our kids in cotton wools that they never feel any pain or anything. Like bubble wrap, if that came for kids, would be like, yeah, that's what you're wearing to go out on your play date today.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that doesn't actually build the strongest kids. As you said, there's a lot of research now that shows that children that have had moderate adversity, I'm not talking about you know, sexual abuse or extreme poverty, but children that have had some adversity and have learned, this is the key though, learned the skills or the tools to get themselves through that, whether that's from having role models like you and Sam or learning coping mechanisms which are going to put them back in the driving seat to take their power back when they need it. That is a valuable life lesson that changes some of that adversity trauma on a low level into something that actually they can say, right, you know what, this is useful and I know how to control it. So when I get to being a teenager and get dumped or don't get into the college I wanted to or don't get the job I wanted to or one of my friends lets me down, I can say, well, this is tough and I can experience negative emotions because we all go through that. But actually I know in my heart because I've seen it, not just from my parents, but from from other people maybe as well. But I've got the experience myself of getting myself back up.
Absolutely. You know, I think one of the things that I'm noticing, I guess, with a lot of families that are divorced and two separate homes, is we want to overcompensate for our kids. So a lot of parents won't use the word no with them. It's just like, whatever you want, because I feel so guilty and so full of shame that I couldn't make my marriage work. And then I've broken your family up, that I'm just going to give you whatever you ask for. And it's such a mistake because there are, kids out there who and I'm just going to, I don't know if I can curse on here, but they become assholes. They just become, entitled little brats who become entitled adults. And you've done your children a service by acknowledging that the marriage wasn't working, that it wasn't healthy for you, that it was an abusive dynamic, and you got out, and you take that opportunity to create a better environment for you, for the kids.
I love that. I'm all for that. I'm actually quite outspoken on this topic because I see so many people saying, well, I stayed for the kids, or I know it's really bad and I'm not living, a happy life, or I'm not, fulfilled myself, but, I'm doing it for the kids. Well, that doesn't wash with me because you are the role model for your children. They are
Mhm.
learning what is marriage, what is love, what is a caring relationship just from watching what's happening in their own home. They don't have anything else to compare it to.
Yeah.
So if you're setting the bar as this is what love is, and it's dysfunctional, or someone's being unkind, someone's in an abusive relationship, and that's tolerated, then they learn that that's what you do. And that's why so many children who have grown up with an abusive parent in their household will either become the abuser because they think, well, that's the way to survive this. I don't want to end up like the other parent.
Yeah.
Or they learn to be the victim because they're used to walking on eggshells and managing scenarios all the time. And there is a third category, which I'm grateful for, because I think it's small. It's the children that say, I see that and it's not acceptable, because, as you said, Jenny, they've got boundaries and they understand, they have a moral code where they understand right from wrong. But also they say, look, it enables them to have a relationship with that parent if they need to, or, hopefully it's safe to do so. A lot of cases, courts nowadays are forcing children into unsafe relationships, and we see this in the press all the time. But, if it's safe to have a relationship on some level with that parent, then it is better for the child to have that, however hard that might be for us as the survivor of abuse from that particular person. But they can navigate it, so they learn that actually I can see the behaviors that aren't right and I'm not taking them on. In fact, I want to stand away from that. But it enables them to spot the abuse and then have what they can of a relationship with that person on their terms. But that only happens if they have a healthy parent to guide them who understands this. And that doesn't involve bad mouthing, like you said. It's very much contrast. It's very much setting your own boundaries and asking them, well, how does that make you feel? And is that okay with you? And just showing them. Because a lot of parents won't even comment. They'll say, well, I don't want to bad mouth because my lawyers told me not. So when they, shut me in that cupboard or shouted at me for a long period of time, that actually I can't say that's not right, because that'd be bad mouthing. No, you can teach them what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior from a young age, because they need to know, they need to have those boundaries clear. So again, it's really important that we do set that right, as long as you're careful not to inflame a situation, because obviously bad mouthing, we can't do that.
Yeah, but also I think that there is power in also saying that somebody can exhibit bad behavior and not be a bad person. So you could say, Daddy's not a bad person, but that behavior was not acceptable behavior. And that's not something that should be tolerated. And so you're not painting that parent in a bad way, but you are calling out the behavior as you would with your children. So, you just hit your sister in the arm. That doesn't make you a bad person, but that behavior is bad and not okay. And so drawing those parallels, I think, is okay to do with children.
Yeah. I feel we're not talking about abusive partners. Yeah, absolutely. If you're talking about abuse, and it's a very difficult one. It's a very difficult line to navigate, which is why I always say get specialist help and advice to help you navigate that path, because it is a fine line and you do have to be careful, because, it is a very tricky emotionally situation to be in, but also financially, if you're getting into the court system, you just got to be very careful of how you act with an abusive personality, because they will capitalize on anything you do.
And they are waiting with bated breath to capitalize on it and jump down the throat of it.
I mean, I was reading some research recently where they were saying, there was a study from Northwestern University actually that said that same-sex relationships suffered higher levels of domestic abuse, especially the violence. So obviously emotional abuse, physical abuse, but the violent side more than heterosexual couples. Have you seen those studies?
I mean, I have seen them. I've read them. Do I know in depth, who the case studies were and what other kind of elements were brought into those studies? No, I don't. I couldn't really comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, as there are across the board, and I think, that was surprising to me, but I think, domestic abuse is out there and it is happening. And I think you used the term high conflict earlier, and I think that's the name that is used within the family court process and the legal process. But I really find that misleading, because if there is a high conflict situation, to most people that sounds like it's kind of a 50-50 thing. But if you're in an abusive relationship, it's usually 99.9% the abuser pushing this forward and causing the problem, and on the other side you're trying to just survive, you're trying to keep standing up, you're trying to do the best for your kids, right? So that high conflict term, I think, is a bit of a whitewash for abuse.
I 100% agree. I use it in describing my experiences for to protect myself. But I do actually 100% agree with you. It's one of the highest forms of abuse. These kinds of personality disorders, psychological and emotional abuse, financial abuse, is something that most people around you can't see. It's only you experiencing it that really understands it. And yeah, I wish that we could just say they are an abuser, but unfortunately that opens up the doors for other litigation.
Yeah. So I mean, you and Sam's amazing. I've met Sam and she's just incredible, as are you, Jenny. And I see that you guys are very strong and you've got a great connection there. And I guess that really helps get through these tough times. A lot of people listening won't have what you have right now, which is an incredible support system around you with your partner, and vice versa for Sam too, to help you when you're having those tough days or you're really dealing with the depths of that abusive behavior. Do you have any sort of tips or advice for how people can navigate that journey, having sort of navigated it yourself?
So I think when you're navigating it with your current partner, so whether it's your current partner's ex or your ex, you're in it together, you're in the trench together, is to just keep open communication. And by open communication, I mean allow yourselves, not just for you, but also allow your partner to be vulnerable and to like clearly identify the feelings that they're having, because so many times, I mean, I myself have I hit my limit, and you have to appreciate that your husband or your wife is also hitting a limit with it. So to just be able to sit there and look at each other and be like, this is so shit, and I feel so shit about this, and I just want to give up, but we got to keep going. And so just allowing your vulnerabilities to like hold space for each other's vulnerability, and how hard it is. I think one of the kind of unspoken things, I think a lot of us, like, and other friends of mine that have experienced what we're talking about, is what we don't say is how difficult it is when the people around you, whether they're friends, whether they're school parents, teachers, whatever, who have no idea who that other person is, and look at you like, how could, you say all these bad things about them, or, they just don't understand, why you're saying that this person is high conflict or whatever. And I would just say, cut those people off. It's the only way that you can navigate it. And especially if you're dealing with a narcissist, any kind of real personality disorder, but specifically a narcissist, they will want to keep friends that are close to you. That's how they get their information about you. People don't like ultimatums, and that's cool because you're not in the abuse cycle and dynamic that I'm in. So you have to empathize with that, appreciate that I need to cut you off if you're not willing to make that decision, because I need to protect myself and my family. So to just keep really strong, clear boundaries with your friends and your family, and keep open communication and vulnerability with your partner, because that's the person that you're going to survive it with.
Yeah. I think they call it flying monkeys. Have you heard that term?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah.
And I think you're right. There are people that will come in, maybe they don't understand, maybe they do, but they're being used by the abuser to get information.
Yeah.
And, because maybe you've had a relationship with these people for a long time, it's difficult sometimes to cut them off. But I think your advice is spot on again there, Jenny. You just got to say no. And you can do it in a nice way, right?
Absolutely.
You can say, look, right now, I can't do it. But, you're a great friend. You've been a great friend for a long time. Just please respect my need for some space right now. And in the future, I'll reach back out when I feel more able to communicate.
And I also think that what a lot of people who haven't experienced this kind of personality disorder don't realize is that they're narcissists in this. They're not just these people with grandiose, think that they're like the cat's meow, whatever. Covert narcissists, there's a thing called covert narcissists. They are the most toxic, and they play the victim beautifully. They are professional victims. And it makes you look like the perpetrator and them the victim. And really it's the other way around. And it is the most soul destroying experience. So this is why it's important to cut the people off around you who are empathizers with the actual perpetrator.
And not waste your energy trying to change their mind.
Yeah, you're never going to change their mind. And you know what I've heard loads of? Oh, I take people as they come. So it's like, well, of course that person is going to present themselves in a certain way to you. Like, are you, but anyways, you go on and enjoy that relationship. Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about your podcast because I love the title. Why are we whispering? And I'm super excited because I'm going to be your guest too. But you seem to explore some really unusual topics. So tell us all about that.
We talked about kind of hitting your threshold, right? We're just in our past conversation. And I kind of got there a couple of years ago where I was just really sick of people not naming their traumas, not naming their uncomfortabilities, embarrassment, shames, because I was finding that what they were feeling or experiencing, many people I know and even myself had experienced. So I just thought, why are we not saying this out loud and sharing it? And actually, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was I was about to go through IVF and I was meeting with kind of like an acquaintance who I'd found out had her children through IVF. And she had said, well, let's have a coffee and I'll kind of go through what my experience was. I was like, perfect. So we met for a coffee. And the whole time in the coffee shop, she's kind of looking over her shoulder and she was whispering a lot about her IVF experience. Now, it had turned out that it was her husband who actually had the fertility issues. So I think there was maybe some shame for him around that, which there shouldn't have been, but there was. And she was almost protecting that, I think, a little bit. But I just felt like she didn't want anybody to know that she had these 3 beautiful children through IVF. And so I came home and I was thinking about it as I was driving home, and I'm like, was that what I think it was? And I was talking to my wife about it, and I just said, why are we whispering? And this is the most beautiful thing a person can do or a couple can do, is to build their family and bring life into this world. Why would you whisper about that? So that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and that's when I decided to start the podcast and to focus on life experiences that most of us have or will experience, but are too afraid to say it out loud.
I love that. And I don't know whether it's being British as well, but I think we're quite used to just sort of, oh, there might be a bit of embarrassment, so I'll keep my mouth shut on that. And in fact, I especially when I started this company, Jenny, I started talking about what had happened to me, that in my relationship, my husband literally catapulted me out of it because he'd met someone else that he was madly in love with, who was 12 years younger. She was stunningly beautiful. And then I found out within a couple of months she was pregnant. People said to me, are you not embarrassed about this? Why are you talking about this? And yeah, I mean, I went through a lot of shame and humiliation and self-doubt and all those things. But actually, by talking about it, I found that it actually helped people. And if it's going to help one person, then for me, that was worth it, because it was turning my pain into my superpower by being able to say, look, I've been through this and this, try this, because it kind of worked for me. So I think you're right. We do need to start talking out. And it takes courage though, right? It takes courage.
It really does. And I think it takes the sting out of a lot of the pain when the more you say something out loud, the less power it has over you. That goes for anything and everything in life. It's another one of the things that we teach our kids. Don't hold anything in. Don't keep secrets in. Just say everything out loud, because then it loses its power. But I think, yeah, with talking about shame and embarrassment, we would feel less shame and embarrassment if we knowledge shared with each other and understood that the person that you're saying whatever it is to has probably themselves experienced it or knows somebody close to them who's experienced it.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. I really agree with that. And Brené Brown talks about vulnerability a lot, doesn't she? And
Yes.
I love when she says it's your greatest strength. And it so resonates for me. That hits hard for me because, that it is, you do put yourself in a vulnerable space because you are going to get people saying, well, I can see it was an obvious upgrade. I remember when that comment came in and I kind of agreed with it because I was looking at this woman who was 10, 12 years younger and I was like, yeah, I can kind of see it too. That's why it hurts so much. But, ultimately it's on some level anyway, you can see that. But, as you go through that process, you realize that actually it's actually making you stronger. And again, those comments that come in sometimes, they, you've got to take them in your stride if you're going to do something like that. But it all works towards your healing process, I think.
Yeah. And I hope you cut that person off from your life.
It wasn't a friend. It was someone on social media.
Oh my
Keyboard
God.
warriors. They love it.
Yeah.
But I kind of got it. But yeah, I mean, I think everything you said in this episode has been really spot on, and thank you so much for being vulnerable yourself, because coming on and talking about your personal experience and the tough times, and it really does inspire others. Where can people find out more about you, Jennie, and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so the children's book that I've written is called Howie Blend. That's the child's name. So Howie and then Blend, Playdate
Love
Adventures
that.
with Family and Friends. You can just buy that on Amazon. But you can actually follow the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Why Are We Whispering? Or on Instagram, handle is at Why Whisper Podcast. And I'm actually in the process of turning the podcast into a docu-series. So we're filming the documentary right now, and you can follow the efforts of that on Instagram as well.
Amazing, amazing. And I have one last question for you that I ask all my guests that come on my podcast. Obviously, it's called Heartbreak to Happiness. So, what is happiness for you, Jennie?
Wow, that's a big question. I think happiness for me is the freedom of living authentically. And that is a choice. And it's a choice that I make consciously every day. Whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. And I just think authenticity is your soul's freedom, and only true happiness can be had when you decide to make that choice.
Ooh, I love that. Authenticity is your soul's freedom. Well, that's a tweetable quote right there. Thank you, Jennie, so much. I mean, everything you've said, I think is spot on, and thank you so much. I think you and Sam are an incredible, inspiring couple, and I know that just talking about your experiences will have helped so many of people listening as well, and shining a light on some things that really aren't talked enough about, I think. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being a fabulous guest.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you're doing, Sara, because it is having a massively positive impact on loads of people, and we need more people talking honestly about this.
We do. Thank you, Jennie.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Heartbreak to Happiness. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to win a free ticket to one of Sara's virtual retreats. The retreats are a transformative combination of live webinars with Sara herself, coupled with empowering online video programs designed to help you cope better with your breakup and start feeling happy again. For more details, head on over to heartbreakttohappinesspodcast.com, where you can also get a copy of Sara's free gift. Thank you, and join us again on the next episode for another dose of Heartbreak to Happiness.